Hello, and on this episode of the Mortgage and Protection Podcast, Paul is back from Henchurch Lane to talk all about how the mortgage process works if you are a freelancer. It's great to chat with you again, Paul. How's it all going?
Very well, thank you, Tessa. How are you today?
Good, I'm glad to hear that. And yes, all good too. Thank you. So, mortgages for freelancers. So, this is a bit different, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Right, let's get straight into these questions that we've got here then. So, first of all, what is a self-employed freelancer?
Okay, so to start with, the definition of a freelancer is someone who's self-employed and not committed to a particular long-term employer. So someone who would do ad hoc work and on a very flexible basis with no real long-term commitment to that.
Right, okay.
That is effectively what a freelancer is in a nutshell. A lot of people might think, well, that's the same as a lot of self-employed people, but you will tend to find that it's comes with some element of professionalism. So maybe like a photographer, a content writer, someone like that that does things for a particular employer or particular contractor, but for a very short period of time and on a very flexible basis.
Okay. There we go. So following on from that, then the next two questions lead on. So can you get a mortgage as a freelancer? How hard is it to do this?
Okay, so yes, you absolutely can get a mortgage as a freelancer. How hard is it to get a mortgage is quite an ambiguous question. As you can imagine, it really depends
Mm.
on the actual sort of setup and the circumstances for that particular individual. So, in some instances, you could find it easier than an employed person to get a mortgage, or actually, you could really struggle. And the devil's going to really be in the detail when it comes to evidence in your income and securing a mortgage. So, it's going to be on a case by case basis. But hopefully, as we progress through this podcast and this question set, that's going to become something that I can elaborate on, as I imagine that's quite a vague answer for a lot of people.
Yes, definitely. Well, we've got quite a few more questions here, so we will go into a little bit more detail. So the next question asks, what types of mortgages can I get if I'm a freelancer? So any differences here?
Okay, so on a conventional level, you can get all the types of mortgages that you can think of as a freelancer. So things like residential, buy to let, limited company, commercial mortgages, etc. But there are always going to be particular schemes out there that aren't going to be available to you unless you're an employed applicant. Okay, so you just need to avoid those. It's not a conventional mortgage, but there will be little schemes that certain lenders offer. Things like the Helping Hand scheme from Nationwide. That's a scheme that provides like an enhanced affordability. So the outcome of your income being entered into the calculator is going to be a little bit more if you get the Helping Hand product. And you're not going to be able to apply for those sorts of schemes if you're effectively a freelancer. Is going to be under the self-employed bracket. But on a conventional level, you're all set. You're good to go.
Okay, so that's good news there. So hopefully reassuring. Now, people would also like to know, and I think you touched on this first part of the question earlier on, but how do I know if I'm classed as a freelancer? How long do you have to be a freelancer before getting a mortgage?
So yeah, exactly that. The definition really determines how you're going to know if you're a freelancer. You're probably going to know if you're a freelancer, but generally speaking, you're going to be self-employed. You're going to be doing things on a short-term basis. You're going to have that flexibility, and you're not going to be tied down to one employer. You're going to be getting paid by multiple different people. Usually, freelancers are going to be set up on a sole trader basis, 9 times out of 10. Not always. Sometimes they might be limited. They might be in a partnership, but generally, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be a sole trader. And if that's the case, then you're going to need to be trading for at least 12 months to secure these conventional mortgages that we're talking about. So once you've hit that 12-month mark, start discussing your particular circumstances, which I've touched on earlier, with a broker. Okay, so don't make the mistake of thinking because you're a freelancer, because you're self-employed, you're going to have 3 years worth of books behind you. As soon as you're at the 12-month point, sit down with someone and go through your situation. Worst case scenario, it might be a 6-month roadmap or something along those lines, but you're eligible from the point where you've been trading for 12 months as a freelancer.
Okay, so that's good news there and something to take away from the episode as well. Now, how much can I borrow and how much deposit do you need for a mortgage as a freelancer? Will I need a large deposit or a larger deposit?
Okay, so how much you can borrow, the maximum loan amount that you can obtain is going to be assessed in the same way as it is always. Okay, so each lender will differ in terms of calculating that annual figure that they're going to enter into the calculator. For example, some will use your latest year's figures, some will use an average of the last two, some will use an average of the last three. Once they have that figure, though, they're going to then apply a background multiple to that. Again, some will be 4, some will be 4.5, 4.75 times. It will all depend on what lender you go to. And then lastly, they're going to factor in your background living costs and the other commitments, and ultimately spit out a loan amount that is likely to vary by quite a large margin from the most generous lender through to or down to the tightest lender or the least generous lender. Okay, so in some instances, especially with self-employed, freelancer, contractor, all those sorts of incomes, we can put all of the figures into a whole of market calculator, and in some cases we can see a difference of £200,000 between the most generous and the least generous lender. So very important to assess, a whole of market approach when you're looking at affordability for those sorts of incomes.
Right, okay, there we go. Now, the next question follows on from that. So I'm not sure if you've got anything else to add to the first part. So, how do lenders assess mortgages for freelancers? What documents do I need to have ready?
Okay, so they assess them very similar to what they would do in the main part. As for most people, they're going to be looking at a way to get that income that they're going to put into the calculator. And the evidence that you're going to need to produce as a freelancer is generally going to be in the way of your tax calculations. Okay, so what you've submitted to HMRC as your earned income over that period or that tax period. So from April to April, all of the income figures that you've added, that you've taken on, take away all of the costs to your business, then you're left with the profit from self-employment. That's the figure that they're going to be looking to enter into the calculator, and to evidence that you're going to need SA 302s, which are also known as tax calculations or tax computations, depending on where you get them from. That comes hand in hand with a tax year overview document. You'll need that to correspond to the year that you're given us. You're always going to need bank statements to show your personal income, your personal outgoings, and you're going to need some identification as well. So passport, driving license, some address proof, and potentially a deposit proof as well, depending on where your deposit's coming from. If it's tied up in your house, that's fine. If it's coming from cash or a gift, you're going to need to display that as well. And just quickly on the last question, you did mention whether or not you'd need a large deposit as a freelancer, and I didn't manage to answer that. But conventional mortgages for the most part will start from a 5% deposit. Okay, if you can bridge the 95% gap that you're left with a mortgage based on your affordability, then you've got 100% of the purchase price. Okay, so being a freelancer is not going to take away those 5% deposit options. And just to go one step further, there is now a mortgage that's available that's referred to as the 1% mortgage, but it's ultimately a £5,000 deposit. So a minimum of £5,000 deposit, and you can buy all the way up to £500,000 property with that. So that would be 1%. But obviously, if you're buying a £200,000 property, it's a £5,000 deposit still, which is going to be a little bit more than 1%. But as long as you can bridge the gap, so purchase price minus £5,000, if you can afford that based on your income situation, then there is currently a scheme on the market that allows that. It comes with lots of different criteria, and we'll probably do a separate podcast about that at some point, I imagine. But just because you're a freelancer, it doesn't mean that you have to stump up 10, 15, 20% deposits. Those things will come with other reasons behind them, things like credit situations or affordability. Okay.
Right. Okay. Well, hopefully that sounds reassuring there. And thank you for covering that and going back on that. And of course, all the list of documents there that you need to know about. And in terms of that, we are recording this episode in June 2024 because, of course, the market changes all the time, doesn't it, Paul? Just to timestamp that.
Yeah. If you're listening to this in 2052, it probably isn't available anymore.
There we go. Always best to check. Now, just lastly, this is a part one of part two, isn't it? We have got more questions that we're going to cover on this, on mortgages for freelancers. So, just lastly, for our part one episode, can I get a mortgage if I'm employed with a part-time or fluctuating income?
Okay. So I'm trying to part-time. Okay, so do you mean a part-time freelancer? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So yes, realistically, any income that we can evidence, right? So if you're part-time or if it's fluctuating, if you submitted a set of accounts to HMRC with a figure on it, there's a good chance that we're going to be able to put that into the equation when we apply for a mortgage. A lot of the times these incomes come with as a secondary, or there is a secondary income to throw in it, right? So a partner, an applicant too, or you might be employed and you do a bit of freelance at the weekends, like a wedding photographer. If you've got an income that's been submitted to HMRC and you've paid tax on that income, then that's going to be able to go into the calculator. Doesn't matter if it's fluctuating. A lot of things people do are seasonal. For argument's sake, the wedding photographer. But if you've got income that's going to HMRC with a tax implication applied to it, then there's a good chance you're going to be able to use that and you're going to be able to get a mortgage subject to everything else stacking up that you need to.
Okay, so again, hopefully that's reassuring there. That's good news. Well, thank you for that, Paul. We've covered quite a bit there, but we've got more to cover, haven't we, on the
Yeah.
next episode? So hopefully that's helped a few people out, and we'll catch you on the next episode, Paul.
Thank you very much for your time, Tessa. Take care.